I've started the recording again as well.
Well, I'll edit it out.
Right?
And
So, I mean, do you think there's a way to
all right.
so it's
I am coming in, if you're watching me now and curious. I am coming in and filling in some property data. And the reason for that is so I can kind of show you some laptop stuff when we get over into formulas. So if you will bear with me while I enter some random, doesn't make any sense data. You'll see how I enter testing data. To make sure your values are unique, you can just go straight down. These values make no sense, but they help you see stuff. All right. So the next building block that we're going to do is how do we do a formula? So now that we have all of these lovely raw materials in the system, we want to be able to do something with them, and that's the formula. All right. So you'll also notice that the ribbon is much busier, which is why I made those comments earlier about look in the ribbon. Good chance up there. All right. So we are going to do today our boot camp training Formula 1. We get a formula ID, and I can call this whatever I want from a description point of view, which I may or may not be able to type. Class ID is up here. Once again, in my demo data, we tend to have food and paint set up so that we can deal with either side of the house. But you can do whatever classes you want for your formulas. It's a reporting field. So a lot of times it often gets left blank until later when you decide that there's a need to separate formulas out into whatever classes you need. The status here for production, we have production user and user class. It is not used a whole lot, so most people, it will just say production. We do have, we talked a little bit about security this morning. For formulas, we do have a second level of security that can be implemented. The security we talked about this morning is screen-based. Who has access to this screen versus that screen? But on your formulas, if there is a need to protect certain formulas from people, what we talked about this morning, someone either would or would not have access to the formula screen at all. We can add in the ability to do what's called formula security that says person A only has access to formulas that start with the letter A, and person B only has access to formulas that start with the letter B, or whatever it is. So if you have different people who need access to formulas, but only a certain subset, is when we go to that second level of security. If you go to that second level of security, this production user class user is used by the system because you can graduate formulas. User A only has access to A's formulas, that kind of thing is where that user part's coming in. So most of you don't need to deal with the status, just leave it at production. Just know that that's out there if you start really getting hung on formula access. Primary version and active version are checkboxes. Every formula should have one and only one primary version. What Vicinity allows you to do is as you make changes, so right now I'm working on my formula ID Bootcamp Training 1. And maybe next year I use the same formula and I keep it the same formula ID, but I can assign a new version to it. So of those versions, one and only one version should be considered primary. You can have multiple versions that are active, or you can deactivate a version by unchecking that active box.
I just set the active, to set your version and active kind of the same screen too. If I change the version to the primary checkbox, I'll check.
When you create a second version, okay. So I've now saved this BC Train Formula One.
Oh, you
When I
added
put
stuff
new
to what-
version,
Okay.
then I'm gonna create a version 2. And when I go to create that version 2, it's actually gonna ask me, do you want this new version to be the primary or leave it alone? And if I make that new version the primary, it'll uncheck the other one for me. So it'll help you to
Okay.
manage that. The time that people sometimes get stuck and they end up with multiple primaries or no primaries, is often when they're playing around with SQL. The screen will usually help you control it. Date entered is going to default to today's date. Version date is going to default to today's date. You could change them if you needed to, particularly if you have historical records of your formulas and they've been around since the year 1860. You could throw that in there if you wanted to. Date last made, that's going to get updated as this formula gets used in production batches. Okay. Once again, our sections, expand all, collapse all. The main section, these top couple of formula, or top couple of fields are all user entered. Can just key what you need to, so you can put in your formulator's name. If you have both a formulator and someone approves your formulas, you can key in a name there. Chemical name, this is another place that if you need, this formula is called Boot Camp Training 1, but it's really, alcohol, something or other, you put in a number there, or a name there, a CAS number here. Most people are putting their CAS numbers on the component instead, but if you needed to, we've got it on the component. All those are just free form entry, key what you need to. The planner is a lookup, and it would feed into, if you're doing the MRP stuff that Randy's training on over there, if you have different planners and they plan different types of formulas. Or even if you have a single planner that they plan all of this type of formula first, then they plan all of that type of formula. Some people have put actual names in there. You have Planner Joe versus Planner Jen, and then Joe leaves. So you're probably better off coming up with a line of business as opposed to a person's name, but it's up to you. To add new lists on that planner is once again go back to V2, go to the setup, and you can create whoever your planners or lines of business, whichever. I'll deal sort of with this mix versus fill in a minute, but the defaults that we have in here, we have a minimum batch size, a default batch size, and a maximum batch size. This maximum batch size in particular becomes important for dealing with MRP and planning. MRP is going to suggest that you need to go make 8,000 pounds of something or 8,000 gallons, but maybe you only have a 2,000 gallon tank. And so you need to make 8,000 gallons of it, but you're going to have to make it as 4 separate batches because of that tank size limitation. This maximum batch size right here will help split that single order into separate batches for you if you need to, if you're dealing with that planning. This batch type here, I don't have any colors in there, I need to set that up. This batch type here also affects for planning. You can create different batch types with different colors. And then when you get to the planning calendar that Randy's going over, your batches show up in different colors. Our breweries in particular like to do, they have a brew batch, a fermentation batch, and a packaging batch. So they'll make each different type of formula a different color. So when they're looking at their planning calendar, it's easy to see which types of batches use. Yield percentage, you start using that if you know that in order to get 100 pounds of manufactured good out, I have to put in 105 pounds of raw materials because there's going to be loss. That's what that formula yield percentage is intended to take into effect. So if I were to make this 95 instead, it's recognizing that in order to get 95 pounds of manufactured formula out, I have to put in 100 pounds of raw materials. It'll help you size your batches based on that. Process LID is allowing for planning on different pieces of equipment. So my 1, 1, 2, 3, or what I have set up in here. You can also make that show up on some of the calendar stuff so you can see what's on one.